the title wrote itself, as I'm sure you can appreciate. This is organized by Darwin College, and the theme this year is revolution. How can I not entitle this talk Revolution by Natural Selection? Now I have to speak about it, and luckily I do have something to say about it because I've been, unlike most people who work on evolutionary biology, I'm coming from a different background. I'm not thinking about genetics and genes, and I can't avoid that, and I'm certainly not trying to denigrate genetics in any way, but my own background as a biochemist is about energy flow and how that works. Why it is that cells are all powered by an electrical charge across membranes, and that electrical charge is equivalent to a bolt of lightning. It's an extraordinary charge on membranes, and all life works that way. And it's been a question of mine over years now, is why on earth is it like that, and how did it get started, and what effects does it have across the history of life? And so I've been asking these questions in books and in my own research. So occasionally I've been described as a revolutionary evolutionary biochemist, which I suppose I should be proud to hear, but actually what I'm saying is not revolutionary at all, really, but it's about the revolutions in the history of life, and that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. So Darwin himself, and I must start with Darwin, is characteristically accused, if you like, of gradualism. In fact, he was quite graduated in what he said about gradualism. This is a famous quote from him, and I'll read it quickly. He says, "It may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, preserving or adding up all that are good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers. We see nothing of these slow changes in progress until the hand of time has marked the lapse of ages, and then so imperfect is our view into the long past geological ages that we see only that the forms of life are now different from what they formerly were." So we don't really see very much of change. It is gradual, it is over a long period. This passage actually reminds me of something that elves might say at the beginning of Lord of the Rings. It's a rather charming view of the history of life. Now, he also said, I think several times in The Origin of Species, that nature does not make jumps. Now, that idea of gradualism in natural selection, this is one of the first trees of life that was drawn just a few years after The Origin of Species, which had Darwin had done a sketch of the tree of life in there. This is Ernst Haeckel, and it's really rather a beautiful tree, and these are also drawings by Haeckel, extraordinary drawings dating back to around about the 1866 or thereabouts. And this was a tree of life that has plants, protists, and animals at the top, going all the way back down to the bottom. And this is still what people are taught in schools. The tree of life is actually a lot more interesting and complex than that, but this simple division of botany and zoology of plants and animals and so on has passed all the way down. And this is a tree of life that is quite current, and it's often used because it's rather beautiful. And it conveys the sense, if we go right back to the beginning here, we have the bacteria, the archaea. I'll say a little bit more about those soon. Eukaryotes coming all the way around to mammals and birds and so on, and humans at the top end. And this gives the sense of continuous progress. And one of the reasons it's interesting to see this particular tree is that it's also showing all the branches that died out and became extinct. And so unlike a tree where you're only looking at species that have survived, we're also seeing all of these branches that don't go anywhere and that lead to extinction. And that, again, gives the feeling that everything has been explored. Everything that's possible to explore has been explored. Now, that is completely misleading. It's really not true. So this is a tree of life that goes back to about 1990 and was done by Carl Woese. And Carl Woese was really a radical, revolutionary figure in evolutionary biology. And he came up with what was known as the three domains tree of life. And literally, there are three domains. So we have the bacteria, we have the eukaryotes, and so we are eukaryotes. So plants, animals, and so on are over here. And I'm representing Carl Woese as a characteristic eukaryote. And then we have the archaea over here. So this was an entirely new domain in the tree of life that really nobody knew about before the 1970s. And Carl Woese had demonstrated that the differences between the bacteria and the archaea and the eukaryotes are almost equivalent to each other. There's furious rows at conferences and in the literature in the 1990s because eukaryotes, well, look at them. Archaea look like bacteria. They're tiny. If you look at them under an electron micrograph, there's not much going on inside them. Same with bacteria. And all the interesting animals and plants and so on, they're all in this tiny little corner of the tree of life over here. This is a Copernican revolution in biology. This is really overturning the idea that plants and animals are something special. And actually, a lot of the variation in the tree that we see is in these tiny single-celled organisms that we don't know very much about, or certainly didn't know so much about back then. Now, I spent a lot of time looking at these kind of trees of life. It took me a surprisingly long time to realize, well, hang on a minute, what on earth was happening down this branch of the tree of life? We have, let me just give you a quick indication. The branch lengths here, this is from a single gene. It happens to be a ribosomal gene, but the length of the branches gives us kind of an indication of how different these are to each other, and that more or less corresponds to how much variation there is within these groups. And if I were to show a modern tree with all of the genes in all of the groups, you'd be lost in all the detail. What you can see here is that there's quite a lot of variation in bacteria, and there's quite a lot of variation in archaea, and there's about the same, there's less, if anything, in eukaryotes. So what this says is that the bacteria and the archaea have been exploring gene information space, genetic information space. You can come up with any combination of genes in bacteria and archaea, and they've tried them all. They've explored all of this space. And what did they come up with? Reminds me of Orson Welles. What did the Swiss come up with? The cuckoo clock. They came up with small single-celled organisms. So it's quite shocking. Whereas something happened down here that led to Carl Woese and everybody in this room and all the plants and animals and fungi and pretty much everything that most biologists have studied over thousands of years. So something different was happening there, and it wasn't about just searching informational space for the right combination that gives rise to complexity. Something else was happening. If you look at the world from the point of view of a bacterial cell, here's my tree of life. I like to keep things simple. 4 billion years ago, 4,000 million years ago, we have fossils. We can't be absolutely sure that these are fossils of bacteria, but they look a lot like fossils of bacteria. And 500 million years later, definitely they're fossils of bacteria. And we think they're bacteria because they look exactly like modern bacteria. So from a bacterial point of view, nothing changed. They came up with all of this amazing metabolic chemistry. They transformed the world. They did amazing things to the planet. I'm not trying to knock bacteria here, but they didn't change in their morphology. And sometime around 2 billion years ago, something happened down this branch of the tree of life that led to all eukaryotic organisms, all complex life that we can see, really. Something happened there. What was it? Well, it's what John Maynard Smith, who was one of the great evolutionary biologists of the 20th century, and he was at UCL, so I'm kind of proud of him for I'm in the same institution. You have plenty of people in Cambridge that you can be proud of in that way, but we treasure those at UCL that we can be proud of. So John Maynard Smith, he called this an evolutionary scandal, and let me just give it to you. All complex life on Earth, basically everything we can see, is composed of one particular cell type, this eukaryotic cell. It's got a nucleus, it's got mitochondria, it's got lots of membranes inside, it's everything that you read in any textbook. Eukaryotes apparently only arose once in 4 billion years of evolution, and they all share universal traits. They all have a nucleus, they all have mitochondria, they've all got the same endoplasmic reticulum. I could list page after page of things from textbooks that every cell has the same, including processes like sex, which involve forming gametes. The gametes fuse together, they line up the chromosomes, they double the chromosomes, they cross over between them. All of the machinery for doing all of that is found in all eukaryotes, apart from a handful that lost it, threw it out of the window. Most of them are doing exactly the same thing, and we see nothing resembling that in any known bacteria or archaea. So bacteria don't evolve those complex traits. So the scandal then is if all these traits arose by standard natural selection, and I'm not here to say revolution, it doesn't exist. Natural selection is real, and it really happens, and traits arise by natural selection. So if those traits arose step by step, and each step has an advantage, as it must, then why did none of them arise in bacteria, given that they had searched all this sequence space? What could have happened? Well, the obvious answer is there was a global catastrophe of some sort. This is a snowball Earth. This is at least an artist's depiction of a snowball Earth. This kind of thing's happened on a couple of occasions in the history of Earth, one around about 2.3 billion years ago, and then another one around 700 million years ago with the Cambrian explosion that I'll come on to towards the end of the talk, following hard on its heels. So there are these global cataclysms. That was around 2.3 billion years ago. There was also a thing called the Great Oxidation Event around that same time. I'm symbolizing it with this stunningly beautiful banded iron formation, which are formed by oxygen rusting iron, or at least this is one way in which they can form, and they precipitate out of the oceans into these layers, and they're really just beautiful. Next time you're in the Natural History Museum, go to the mineral section and look at the banded iron formations they've got in there. So there are global cataclysms, but you still have the same problem. Okay, so now there's a global extinction, lots of things get killed, and so then we see the eukaryotes afterwards. But why do we not see bacteria doing equally interesting things? It's not as simple as just a cataclysm. This, I think, is the beginning of the answer. This is a tree of life that was drawn by Bill Martin about 25 years ago. And what you're seeing here, I'm not going to say much about this, why you see two separate emergences. Leuca is the last universal common ancestor, and it lived in a vent, according to Bill, and I would agree with him. And then we have the bacteria coming out from here, and we have the archaea coming out from there, and look what's happening with eukaryotes. We have an archaea and a bacterium coming together in some kind of an endosymbiosis. In other words, one cell gets inside another and lives inside. We have another one here which gives rise to chloroplasts and plants, but this gives rise to all the animals and pretty much everything that doesn't have chloroplasts. So there's what I would call a singular endosymbiosis, and this seems to be the root of what was different about the early evolution of eukaryotic cells. So why then would endosymbiosis drive a revolution in the history of life? It's because it changed the structure of cells. I'm just going to give you a very quick potted synopsis of the things I'm going to tell you in the rest of the lectures, just to orientate you to where I'm going with this. Change the structure of cells. Now we have cells inside cells, a kind of Russian doll model of what cells are like. The cells that went inside became what we now know as mitochondria. These are the power packs that we have in our own cells. We have trillions and trillions of mitochondria in our cells, and they are burning food in oxygen to generate the power that we need to live. They're doing plenty of other things as well, but that's the simplest way of getting your hand around it. So having cells inside cells internalizes cell respiration, and it's changing the structure. Instead of doing it across the cell membrane, we're now doing it inside. And we brought genes inside as well, so we've got both genes to control it and this electrical charge on membranes, which is pretty powerful. Cell respiration, as I say, is not chemistry in a bag. It's not about molecules interacting with each other and reacting with each other. It's about the electrical charge on the membrane. It's not a particularly strong charge. If you were to measure it, it's actually quite hard to measure. We're talking about 200 millivolts, 150 to 200 millivolts. But the membrane itself is 5 millionths of a millimeter thick. So if you were to shrink yourself down to the size of a molecule and go and stand next to that membrane, the electrical field strength that you would feel if you're standing there is about 30 million volts per meter. That is equivalent to a bolt of lightning. And that's across all of this stretch of membranes. I think I calculated once you've got about 4 football pitches worth of mitochondrial membrane inside you, and the charge across that entire surface is equivalent to bolts of lightning, every bit of it. So it's a tremendous power. That's what's keeping us alive. And I think it's constraining that power is what made this revolution the origin of the eukaryotic cell in the history of life on Earth.